Welcome back to Prosperity Pep Talks. You can hear I'm a little raspy today. I have a little cold I got from my toddler, but I am powering through to be here. I'm so committed to these pep talks and, of course, resting when rest is needed. But I felt really strongly I wanted to follow through on my commitment to pep talks today. So Prosperity Pep Talks are short, daily-ish transmissions I do on sacred leadership and activating your work as a sanctuary for your soul's calling, so your offerings can become a force for healing, love, and liberation. I'm an initiated priestess from a lineage of spiritual leaders and female entrepreneurs. I've built my business as my devotional offering, and I guide sacred healers to weave their medicine and modalities into sovereign wealth-building movements. Welcome to Prosperity Pep Talks. So there's a lot happening at the time of me going live and recording this. A lot happening in the world. And it feels like every week there is something new to reckon with, and that is being orchestrated intentionally by those who are in the seats of power right now. And every time we're hit with a new moment of destruction and a new moment of heartbreak, it firms up my knowing that we are here in this time, like we chose this time to come to this earth now for a reason, to build something new. This unsustainability Mother Earth is responding to, and our hearts are responding to, our bodies are responding to. And we've had so much focus in the personal development industry in the past handful of years on first, like if you've been in this industry long enough, or even just been receiving like the new age vibes long enough, you know, my first introduction into this industry was through like law of attraction manifestation, right? So this idea, this construct that what you think creates your reality. And there's a lot of benefit to that because it gives us ownership over our lives. But I also remember listening to, I'm not going to name names, but a very big name in the law of attraction teachings. They were asked by one of the people at an event, they were asked by the person, like, so what does this mean for suffering, for children who are suffering in the world? Who didn't choose to be brought into those circumstances? Like, what does it mean? What does law of attraction mean for people who are in circumstances beyond their control? Like, are we really saying that every single person signs up for everything they experience, especially those who don't have actual agency in their lives because of the systems and or because, you know, they're still developing their little ones, you know? And the person who was the leader in the event, who was teaching on law of attraction, said, well, their soul did sign up for it. And if we put too much focus on the suffering, then we're going to manifest that. So we need to focus on more positive things to keep our vibration positive, which, you know, to me, when I heard this, I immediately was like, I don't think I can follow that leader anymore. And there's one thing that happens with this rhetoric is for those of us who are feeling, like especially those of us who are big feelers, we feel the weight of that suffering. And we're like, oh, okay, I don't have to pay attention to that. I have a reason to not pay attention to that. And the reason is to protect myself. But while boundaries are important, of course, if the rhetoric and spiritual teachings is to essentially ignore the suffering of others, we can get so caught in that disconnection that we forget the purpose of this work in the first place, which is creating not just peace, prosperity, love, liberation for ourselves, but to create the systems for ourselves and others where we can all thrive, right? Imagine this like a flower bed in a garden, and we plant a few different seeds, and, you know, one seed says, oh, I'm going to focus on harnessing all that sunlight so I can grow big and strong. And another seed is perhaps in a part of the flower bed that's shaded, right? They literally don't have the ability to move over, though they'll grow. And what happens if you grow plants, you'll know it's called leggy. It's where the stem is just they're stretching, they're working so hard to get to the sunlight that the stem is longer and thinner than what can support the weight of the leaves or the flower. And so they get a little like wobbly in their effort to grow toward the sun and out of the shade. And I think the flower then that's like, I'm harnessing all the sunlight, and was just happened to be planted in a sunny space. It would be wild for that flower to look at the leggy, struggling one and say, ugh, you just didn't harness enough sunlight, when they were literally planted in a shadier spot, right? But what I'm interested in us doing is looking at, okay, if we're gardeners, like, what can we do to ensure that there is enough sunlight for all of the plants, right? Perhaps that means pruning the tree that is shading. Perhaps that means moving the flower bed a little bit to the side. And I think that if we're looking at this New Age rhetoric of manifestation, and we're looking at like, how can we harness all that light ourselves without looking at the conditions that shape the collective. You know, we're essentially in this bypassing selfish way of being, and there's nuance, right? We need to focus responsibility on ourselves, and we want to have helpful boundaries so that we're not so dysregulated to a point we're not able to take action. And also we need to have this like bird's eye view of, we're not just the flowers, but we're also the gardeners. One of the biggest shifts that I have found to be helpful in reclaiming my own responsibility out of, and still being able to work with manifestation as a technique in a helpful way, is to really look at systems to learn more about and see how can I emulate these more healing systems in my life. So one of the systems that's getting a lot of talk, necessarily so, is matriarchy, right? And matriarchy is not women in charge. It's a circle, and it's a consciousness that's life-protecting, community-centered, cyclical rather than hierarchical, rooted in stewardship, not domination. And in this way, you know, if we want to manifest matriarchy, we can't just sit in that personal development of radiating love and light just because we're so aligned within ourselves. So that's helpful. But we also have to look at, okay, what is my literacy in systems, so that if I happen to be that flower that happened to be planted in a place of privilege to sunlight, like, how can I share that light with the other flowers? Or how can I communicate to the gardener to trim the tree effectively rather than just being like, well, it's good enough for me, right? That's how privilege works, is if we happen to have been planted in a place in the garden that has adequate sunlight, then we might not think to stop and ask the gardener, the people in power, to change what they're doing, because we're so focused on soaking up the sunlight, and it's good enough for us that we don't think about what's happening with the flowers who happened to be planted in the part of the garden bed without as much sunlight. But what happens, and you know this if you garden, if there is a plant in the flower bed that is not doing well, it is more likely to contract diseases, and pests are more likely to attack it because it's more vulnerable. Then if you have an infestation on that unwell flower, the pests will move over to the flowers that are actually doing well, and the whole bed can become infested. So what does that tell us about our role right here on the planet? As healers, I want more healers to become leaders. And in order for us to become ethical leaders who can actually create change, we need to have greater understanding of our role and our relationship to power and what it actually looks like for us to help others. And everybody is going to have a different role in this because we all have our own part to play based on our own unique strengths and talents. And if this is something you want to explore more deeply and have more literacy on these social constructs, both harmful and helpful, if you want to figure out what your actual role is, especially in how it relates to the gifts that have been bestowed upon you and that you have cultivated as a healer, I'm teaching a workshop with a collaborator, Dr. Michelle, in just a handful of days. So if you're curious, you can check that out. It's at the link in my bio. I will put the link in the show notes. You could also go to live.theselflovelifestyle.com/liberation. But it's a really going to be a really beautiful, joyful workshop on social change taught to you by two priestesses of two different lineages. And I don't really see very many other offerings like this out there. So I would love to invite you in. We've confused leadership as domination, and that's a lot of what brings us into this really challenging dynamic that we're in collectively. But if we're able to resource more people with the language and the understanding and the education and the tools to utilize that love and light and healing magic for not just our own lived experience with the world, it really benefits all of us, right? Like the flower, imagine if we're able to create that flower bed where it all gets sunlight, where there is equal watering, then the flowers are much less likely to contract those, harmful pests that are going to cause the whole bed to suffer. And in this metaphor, I would say the pests and diseases are like the inequalities and the isms and the structures that cause one person to suffer more than the other. Most of us experience some level of both, right? We kind of know what both the situation can feel like to be privileged and to not have privilege, but holding awareness of like where we do have power, how we can really share the work that we want to do with the world in a way that spreads more light, that is regenerative, is so beautiful and so needed right now. And for those of us who, like myself, who feel so deeply in reading the news and understanding what's unfolding, through aligning your work as a healer with a mission of collective liberation, it gives you somewhere to put that despair. That just feels more personal than, of course, we need to vote and we need to talk to our representatives and, do all of the mutual aids, like do the things that move the needle in terms of putting pressure on the people who currently hold power. But if we're also orienting ourselves in new ways of being, in new ways of bringing our healing work out into the world, it gives us purpose in a way that makes it so we don't feel as powerless. And that in and of itself, in this type of season that we're all experiencing of destruction and chaos, that in and of itself having a purpose is so healing. And it keeps us on track to creating a paradigm where everybody is able to access sunlight and water. Blessings to you. I hope that you'll join me for the upcoming workshop, The Priestess Path to Liberation. We also go over matriarchal leadership in the hearth, which is my temple for sacred leadership. And there's an upcoming full moon ceremony happening this week in the hearth. So if you're curious to explore either of those offerings, I will link them both in the show notes here. They're also at the link in my bio on Instagram. You can send me an email, melanie@melaniemonaco.com, or a DM at MelanieRoseMonaco on Instagram. I would love to connect with you. All right, my love, blessings to you. Thanks for joining me for another Prosperity Pep Talk, and I'll see you soon.